The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to the History of Heavy podcast, episode 9. This is the show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I'm your host, Michael Huntsman, and as always, joined by my host and dear pal, Big Daddy Dave Lieberman. Hello, David.
At your service.
Back to our ongoing conversation. 8 episodes deep, about to be 9 episodes deep. This one's a big one though, man. This is the year of my birth. So 1968 feels like a million years ago. It wasn't a million years ago. It was it will be 50. I'd rather not say.
It's 162
I am
years
aging.
ago.
And you know, maybe not coincidentally, we'll be talking about several songs that are from the year 1968. In fact, 6 songs across 6 episodes that came out in the year of 1968, starting with the great Velvet Underground and their 17-minute plus epic Sister Ray. But before we get into that, Dave, let's talk about the mighty Black Sabbath at Villa Park and the news that was announced that our boys will, in fact, all 4 of the original boys, that would be Ozzy, Tony, Bill, and Geezer, playing one last hurrah in their home stomping grounds of Birmingham, England, at the Aston Villa Stadium, Villa Park, in July of this year. What the fuck, man?
They're dubbing this back to the beginning, and it's a full circle. I was talking to my wife about seeing them on like This Is the End tour or something,
The end,
25 years ago or so, whatever the tour was in 1999, 2000. And like, okay, this is it. They're done.
Never see them again.
No, this is it. These guys are getting old. And I think at the time, they were as old as we are now. And so I feel older than I ever have been, but I don't feel as old as a rock star that's been living hard and, living, the phrase I think is rode hard and put away wet.
Right.
And it showed. They looked kind of rode hard and put away wet. But it's like 25 years later, and we're doing it again. And it's just a testament to the human body. But more than that, it's a testament to the staying power of the music and the absolute foundational role they played in, making a structure for us to have this conversation. Right? They aren't at the beginning of our conversation, but because they exist, it helps channel the cloud that was forming and the urges that were expressing themselves and just weren't gelled together. We get to Black Sabbath and things like congeal in a way that sets real hard for a tree to grow on and all the branches. And we're going to talk about a lot of those branches, and we've used that metaphor before, and I think it's a good one. But man, I was shocked to hear the news, and I don't know. I'm supposed to be halfway across the globe a week before. I already got shut out of the early ticket sales. We'll see. There is a ceiling on this. I don't think I can spend all of my money to go see them, but
Yeah, and it's starting to look like that's what it would, it's kind of your
yeah,
firstborn plus and plus. And look, I think you said it well the other night on the phone it's not going to be good.
no, it's
But,
and yeah,
to
that
pay
wouldn't be the reason to
homage.
go. Yeah. The reason to go is to say that I went,
Right.
and the reason to go is to say that I went with you. Um, so yeah,
Well, who knows? Let's, miracles have happened. So we'll see how it plays up in the coming months. But yeah, look, we are not doing this podcast if not for Black Sabbath. No matter that we started, 20 years or not 20 years, 10 years before their debut, um, with Link Ray, that doesn't matter. Without Black Sabbath, we're not doing this podcast. We're not having any of these conversations.
right,
And
right.
the lineup of support at that show is indicative of their influence, from Metallica and Slayer to Pantera and Gojira, to Mastodon. I mean, it's insane.
Well, and
Um,
your comment, was great. I was like, man, this would have been a great show 25 years ago. And you're like, yeah, and 10 years ago and 15 years ago. And it's like
yeah.
half of these bands have been going since then. And it just
Not one of these bands on the bill are in their prime.
right.
Not, not even
Right.
Mastodon, whom I love and put out a great record 2 years ago now, Hushed and Grim. But even them, even their high water mark is 5 years ago.
Right. Right. But like that actually means something because
Yeah.
let me try to express this. The fact that Sabbath has been around 50 years, right? Um, and they're still around. And there's fans that like you and me that still are counting pennies to figure out like I love my kid, but I mean I could go see Black Sabbath. It's like my first one. Like what's it gonna be? I'm thinking uh,
Priorities.
and these other bands are also still around because their fan base is still around because this music connects, it moves, and it you build on it. And I think it's pretty um, indicative of the impact that it has and the meaning and the importance that it has. Just the fact that this band is so old and they're still going out there and they're selling out immediately, like 30 minutes. And the whole lineup is old and are selling out. Like those
Yeah.
bands sell out their own shows, right?
I mean,
Like,
Metallica is bigger than any other band on the bill by a lot.
right. But like every single one of them has their fan base that is from the 80s or 90s.
Right. Right.
And there's just a whole family of them. So it's just what it says to me is, um, it's interesting when different technologies come up and in history and like, oh, TV, well, it's going to ruin everything. Oh, it's just a fad. No, it's forever, right? Video games are going to ruin. No, it's just a fad. No, everybody plays video games, and it's like now things are gamified because they see the psychological connection and there's benefits. And hip hop, rap, oh, it's ruining music. It's going to be a fad. It'll go away. It is so structural, right? Kendrick Lamar was just at the Super Bowl. Um, I don't know how hip hop he is, but
Extremely.
okay, well there you go.
Yeah.
Um,
He's the most hip hoppy that they've ever had at the Super Bowl. I mean, I
didn't
guess they
Snoop do
had
it?
50 Cent and Jay-Z or Dre, and they did that
Yeah.
superstar thing. But as a single rapper, he's the biggest. Like.
So it's not a fad, right?
No,
And
no,
metal
it's not a fad.
right, and heavy music and dark music has always been that kind of like, oh, it's a phase. He'll grow out of it, right? He's 14. He's mad at the world. Of course, he's listening to this music. Well, I'm 51. I'm still listening to this music. It's still awesome.
It's unbelievable how specifically those first six records have held up. I mean, they haven't aged a day in a lot of ways. All right, but look, we're 24 minutes into this Velvet Underground podcast. We've only talked about Black Sabbath, so let's pause the beat. I have mentioned, we have talked about how your son Hoodie, represented on these podcasts, is part of our through line, and Sun is a band we reference often. We will reference no band more than we will reference Black Sabbath. So we will continue the conversation leading up to that show, and certainly through our actual Sabbath podcast episode. But not tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Velvet Underground in 1968. So tell us, besides the birth of Michael James Huntsman, what was going on in that year, Dave?
Days. I mean, that's all I got. One thing, Michael J.
What else is there?
Yeah. In fact, a few of the next batch of songs is coming from 1968, so it's going to be an abbreviated cultural corner, splitting it up between all of them. The couple of things so just for the first, Q1, I pulled some things out of February, and the couple things that I pulled out were actually pretty big. February 1st, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad merged to form Penn Central, which is the largest ever corporate merger up to this date, right? So 1968 is at this moment a pinnacle of capitalism and American commerce. And I think that we see that in a lot of economic and lifestyle indicators throughout 1968. That's just the fountainhead of it. Vietnam War, the execution of, and I'm going to butcher this name and I apologize, Nguyen Van Lem. So a Viet Cong officer is summarily executed by Nguyen Ngoc Loan, a South Vietnamese national police chief. The event is photographed by Eddie Adams, and the photo makes headlines around the world, eventually winning the 1969 Pulitzer Prize, and sways U.S. public opinion against the war. And there's album covers of this, right? Yeah. I can't remember who the band is. You might.
Nail Bomb, I think, has an album with that black and white image of the
yeah, it's a guy with a pistol holding it up, and just like you can just see the moment, and it's very disturbing. It's a very disturbing image. All of it, but it was super powerful, and of all the powerful imagery that was happening during that war, and all of the news that was coming out and was being reported, this is the moment that really swayed. This was the critical mass moment, right? There's a lot of things building, but this was the tip over so that was worth mentioning. February 8th, civil rights movement in the United States, the Orangeburg Massacre, a civil rights demonstration on a college campus to protest racial segregation in South Carolina, broken up by highway patrolmen. 3 African-American students are killed, the first instance of police killing student protesters at an American campus. Now, and a trope almost.
Yeah, awful. Is that where we are at the Cultural Corner?
That's where we are at the Cultural Corner. It's a dark place, and things are heavy, and I can't think of a better way to intro this discussion.
Okay, well, here we go. On that very light note, let me start at least a musical portion of tonight's conversation, the non-Black Sabbath musical portion of this conversation, by saying that I absolutely adore the Velvet Underground. And that their first album, The Velvet Underground and Nico, is one of my all-time favorite records. That said, there is nothing on that album that comes remotely close to being considered for a topic of conversation for the chronology of heavy. I think this song is a very unique thing as it relates to heavy in the Velvet Underground's catalog. This song, which closes side 2 of their second album, White Light, White Heat, is a very different beast from the rest of that catalog. And I don't think it's really possible to trace the history of heavy, like with Black Sabbath, without it, because of its influence on so many influential bands that would follow. The song is based on a short story that Lou Reed wrote in 1967 about the titular transvestite smack dealer, Sister Ray. The music was composed by Reed and the other Velvets. That would be viola and bass player John Cale, drummer Mo Tucker, and guitarist Sterling Morrison. They recorded the song in a single take, with the band agreeing beforehand that they would keep whatever flaws occurred during the recording. The end result was over 17 minutes of improvised material that would end up being the longest song by far in their catalog. Interestingly enough, given our recent conversations about the heaviness that bass adds to music and rock and roll songs in particular, there is no bass on Sister Ray, as their bass player John Cale was playing organ on the track. Sister Ray was one of the band's favorite songs to play, and they would often close their sets with it. Jonathan Richman, Joy Division, and the Sisters of Mercy have all covered the song live. Rock critic Lester Bangs, who I am a big fan of, said of the song that it evolved from a basic funk riff into 17 minutes of stark sound structures of incredible complexity. It would not only serve as a huge influence on the likes of Pussy Galore, Sonic Youth, and My Bloody Valentine, but it would also point the way for Lou Reed himself, who would test the limits of feedback and listener patience on his Metal Machine Music solo album, which would be released in 1975, and we will be talking about on this very podcast on a future episode. So, Dave, I'm not sure, as long as we have known each other and as much as we have talked about music and as much as I love this band, I am not sure we have ever talked about the Velvet Underground. So tell me about your relationship with this band, and then tell me about your take and any relationship you may have had with Sister Ray in particular.
I don't think it's ever come up in conversations either. I don't have a deep relationship with the band. I know the one song, which I'm blanking on right now.
Heroin, Sunday Morning, Venus and Furs.
Not Sweet Jane, but Wild Side. Take a Walk on the Wild Side.
That's Lou Reed's solo.
Reed, which is
right.
not the Velvet Underground.
Right.
But because that song is so well known, I learned about the Velvet Underground. And then the Cowboy Junkies cover of Sweet Jane introduced me to more Velvet Underground. I have a very cursory knowledge of them. I didn't ever really connect with them or explore their music, but I've always known of them because of their influential impact in the scene and their credentials as avant-garde artists, right? They're more than a band. They're artists, and they have an avant-garde quality and reputation, which gives them this kind of freedom to explore. So I've always known about them. I've always known that much about them, but I don't know them. I don't know them through their music personally.
They're a classic example of a band that was, the bands that they influenced were far more successful than they were at the time. They were kind of an art project, put together largely by Andy Warhol. And it was kind of a mysterious alchemy that worked in ways that I don't think even the band expected to work. And they were as much an art installation as they were a rock and roll band. But really Lou Reed and John Cale in particular, just their talent was just kind of astronomical. And then you get the Nico vocal on the first record specifically that really just changed kind of the dynamic. You had this kind of heavy psychedelic, kind of dark, brooding, intense music, and then this like beautiful Germanic voice singing on top of it that was, you know, a model. It was just this weird alchemy that was just obviously very special. And you know, so many. They're an example of a band where, you know, their fingerprints are on all kinds of music, from, you know, singer songwriter to, you know, certainly alt and indie rock, to what would become shoegaze and post punk. And ultimately, as we are talking about Sister Ray tonight, sort of really heavy, cacophonous, you know, feedback driven noise and drone and stoner metal, in kind of very interesting ways. This is by far the most cacophonous song we have talked about on the episode.
We did have the John Coltrane song.
True. No, you're right. I should not have been so emphatic. You're right. Ascension is at least as cacophonous as Sister Ray. The thing that to me about Sister Ray that I love so much is how the song falls apart. How it sort of starts as this, what seems just kind of like a structured kind of rock song, or, you know, mid-tempo kind of rock song. And then they just kind of hang on that riff, and you can kind of feel, you know, Mo Tucker, who is not a technically great drummer, but she was always able to kind of, she was to the Velvet Underground what I think Ringo was to the Beatles, or Phil Rudd was to AC/DC, you know, just kind of that sort of backbone that the music needed to kind of stay together. And I think this song is kind of a good example of that, where even as everything else is falling apart around her, she kind of maintains it through that 17 minutes. But you know, the sort of contrast of, I don't know if I would call the first, you know, 5 minutes of Sister Ray beautiful necessarily. But it's, you know, the classic Lou Reed storytelling thing. And as he's telling you this story, the music, which fits perfectly for this fucked up story of this kind of transvestite dealer in New York City in the 1960s, the music intensifies and falls apart as Sister Ray's life presumably is falling apart. So to me, it's sort of all of the levers. Like it's the lyrics and the really dry, you know, Lou Reed can't sing a lick, but he's got that perfect, you know, perfectly unique voice. The music that's kind of structured but not. The crazy length of the song, the improvised nature of kind of the way they're approaching the song. I like this song in our conversation because I think it's distinct. It has a lot of the elements of the songs we've talked about previously, but, you know, this is sort of, if you smashed, you know, Louie Louie and Ascension together, you know,
Yes.
you might get
That's
Sister
great.
Ray.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was really my reaction to this song, because I'd never heard this song before. And I saw the length of it as I'm listening. I was like, wow, okay, well,
We got a ways to go.
Yeah. And like, it starts off very different than it builds up to, and then it ends. And so, but there's a through line, and Lou Reed's voice stays very like even throughout it. And so it's like, it feels like you're on a pretty heavy like mushroom trip that gets real. I took mushrooms once, and this dude was freaking out, and to get away from him, me and my buddy went into this other room where they were watching Beetlejuice, and that was the most intense movie I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And this was like the soundtrack to that almost. It's like, it's building up. There's this. I was very curious why this was on our conversation list, for the first couple minutes.
Right.
And then I got it, right? Yeah, for the first couple minutes. But then it gets like more and more intense and like just falls off the rails, but doesn't. It's like hanging on as it's falling off the train as the train is trucking, down the track. And it's not off the rails, but it's flirting with off the rails. And this whole bigness of sound, the cacophony of sound that you put it, or a wall of sound, it's not just noise. There's structure to it, and there's this rhythm that's going, and that drumming just kind of keeps it together, and Lou Reed's voice kind of keeps it together, and the refrain is something like sucking on his ding dong. But in that Lou Reed sing-songy, not really singing, but sing-songy delivery, sort of letting you know that I'm still here. I'm your guide. I'm going to guide you through this trip. Meanwhile, this trip is intense, right? And that's kind of why we're talking about it, because it's got a weight. It is heavy. It is heavy.
Yep.
But to come out of this this group of people is a little unexpected. And I think that it's just really interesting to me that this band came up with this song, and like it somehow feels really natural to hear it from them. But it doesn't seem like it's connected to the rest of their discography.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about how heavy is a lot of things in a lot of this music beyond the sonics of the music. And the Velvet Underground, the individuals that made up the Velvet Underground were certainly heavy people. They were living in New York at a very heavy time. They were big thinkers. They were pseudo-intellectuals. They were deeply engaged in the New York art scene. They were junkies. Like, they were heavy people. And I think their music, a lot of their music across their catalog can be categorized as quote unquote heavy. But I think Sister Ray is the only song that is also sonically heavy. So that's why I wanted to include it in this conversation. But I'm curious, if you had to tag a genre on this song, what would you call it?
Oh, wow. It's parts of a lot of things, right? Because it's kind of psychedelic, it's kind of funky, it's kind of, there's a little bit of bluesiness to it. There's some little English on it. And it's interesting to know that the bass player is playing the organ, because that suddenly makes a lot of sense to me. The bass player is often doing a groove and a rhythmic quality, bringing that to the sound, that sound to the song, and that balance to the song. But in one clef, right? And in an organ, you're playing piano style, you're playing both treble and bass clef. And so, but having that bass sensibility in that medium is really interesting. But I think it brings these other qualities. So genre, man, I don't know. I would ask you what genre it is, and then I would probably agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one of the things I was asking myself this. It's one of the things I think I really love about the Velvet Underground, because I think they are kind of genreless. Broadly speaking, on Wikipedia, they are given 3 genres. It says art rock, psychedelic rock, and proto-punk. I think all are fair tags, but I don't think any actually capture what they sound like necessarily.
If I had to pick one term, I would just come back to avant-garde. Like,
yeah, I think that's a good term, except
any and all of those.
The thing that's hard about to me with avant-garde is that it implies an unapproachability that the Velvet Underground definitely have. I mean, particularly the first record, the Velvet Underground and Nico. I mean, that record is extremely melodic and sing-songy and has great melodies. I, it's a long way from a pop record, and I wouldn't even call it a rock and roll record necessarily. But avant-garde, I don't think you're wrong. I think there is an avant-garde nature to the Velvet Underground, but again, they have a sense of song structure, even in this song, a sense of song structure and melody that, like a Glenn Branca or Diamanda Glass or Lydia Lunch or like whomever, like that you would call quote unquote avant-garde doesn't have. So I don't know, I think that's what's interesting. And one of the things about Sister Ray that I think is so cool is it almost it's almost multiple genres within the 17 minutes of the song itself.
Not almost. That's the part that's making it so hard to classify.
Right.
Is because it isn't almost genres. It's like 2/3 of one, 1/5 of another. It's like this impossible fraction. I can't do that kind of math. But it's that kind of math fraction, right? And avant-garde just, to me, sums up the indescribable quality to it, because avant-garde is the presence of an absence of classification. That's how I
that's a good way to
connect with that term, right?
Yeah.
It's something you can't really classify, but it's not accidental. It's not unbeautiful. It's not noise. It's somewhere. It threads a needle between all these things of knots. And so it is, right? It's the presence of this absence of other things. That's where I come up with avant-garde if I have to pick something.
No, I think that's, that's an excellent description. I think their closest heir apparent, maybe their most mainstream heir apparent, and I mentioned them earlier, but it would be Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth has that avant-garde, noisy, unstructured kind of energy, but also wrote great hooks and
totally.
So
but they did it in a weird tuning, right? They like
all kinds of crazy tunings.
Yeah. And in that same
art rock kind of way.
The same spirit of like, we're making a song and we're doing it adjacent to the mainstream.
Right.
And we're using these instruments that are common differently. We're going to tune them over here. And we're going to do this rhythm that's asymmetrical and time signatures that are, like all that kind of stuff kind of arrives, for lack of a better term, at avant-garde or art rock. I think art rock would probably be fair for this song, at least, because it touches on all these other genres. It's impressionist, it's not a thing. It's a bunch of feelings of things. And there's just so much packed into this song. And it's a long song, but there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of depth and a lot of weight. It's very heavy.
Yeah. I mean, I think other heir apparents of the Velvet Underground certainly are David Bowie and Roxy Music, and certainly those are probably the first two artists I think of when I think about art rock. So,
what about like Kate Bush?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good one. Yeah. Did you enjoy Sister Ray?
I didn't super connect with it.
Yeah.
And it's because it was my first pass and I don't have a relationship with this band.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell right away, right? Yeah. I could tell, like, this is a song you have to. I had a Dinosaur Jr. moment.
Mm-hmm.
it took me a long time to get into Dinosaur Jr. I had a friend who was really into Dinosaur Jr. I could not stand the vocals. I didn't understand it at all. I ended up with 6 or 7 Dinosaur Jr. albums and really, really connected with them because it was an acquired taste. But once I acquired the taste, I understood it. And I immediately felt that way about this song. I was like, okay, there's so much going on here that's intentional and not it's not accidental. That's what intentional means. But it, to the passing observer, it would be brushed off. But I have enough of an ear to know that they mean what they're doing. They did this on purpose. There is a freedom in here that's also on purpose. There's some structure in here that's giving the freedom the room to move and an open context, and it's the foundation that's holding it. But I didn't personally connect with it because I knew it was bigger than something you can connect with in a listening or two.
Yeah, that's well said. You know, context is everything, right? I don't think I would like Sister Ray as much as I do if it wasn't the Velvet Underground. You know, I'm kind of one of those fans where if I've listened to their first record 1,000 times, whatever the number is, I probably listened to this record, White Light, White Heat, probably 100 times, like probably a tenth of the times that I've listened to that first record. Because this isn't the energy that I'm looking for when I want to listen to the Velvet Underground. But again, in the context of this conversation, I think it's an important song and an interesting song to talk about. This is the second episode in recent episodes that you mentioned Dinosaur Jr. And I will admit that they are a band that I have never understood. That I do not like Dinosaur Jr. I hate Jay Mascis's voice. I think he's way too busy of a guitar player. And like you, have friends that love them, friends that I think have great taste, and I know that it's me with Dinosaur Jr. Like I know they're great, I just don't get it. We all have those bands, those blind, Talking Heads is one of those bands for me. Wilco is one of those bands for me where it's just like, no matter how many times I've tried, I just don't get why people think these bands are so great. But in the context of this ongoing conversation, we should probably talk about Dinosaur Jr. at some point because they are important in the context of this conversation, the way Sister Ray is important.
Yeah, maybe. And I don't know, you should give yourself more credit. I think that you do get what people like about these bands. You just don't like them.
Yeah.
Because those bands that you mentioned, like Wilco, I also never connected with them, but I immediately understand why people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Is there other music you can think of? So your comparison to Dinosaur Jr., I feel like was not, you weren't comparing Sister Ray sonically to Dinosaur Jr. You were talking about the experience of knowing that you're not going to understand Sister Ray in 3 or 4 listens or whatever it is. You have to invest
comparison is that it's an acquired taste.
Right. So I'm wondering if, we talked when we were talking about the Coltrane song Ascension in the context of the Coltrane catalog and the periods we love and kind of the relationship to that period of Coltrane to the free jazz stuff of Ascension and beyond. Are there other bands, let's just say bands, that sound reminiscent of Sister Ray that you do like? So I guess what I'm asking is the difficulty with the music unique to this song, or is it just like, this isn't generally the kind of music that I gravitate toward? Like, do you like Sonic Youth, since we talked about them?
Again, like, I appreciate some of their songs, but I've never owned one of their albums. And also more of I think it's a time and place opportunity. The on-ramp for Sonic Youth is in my past. I missed that on-ramp.
I'm going to disagree with you. And
okay.
I'm going to disagree because I always liked Sonic Youth, but I fell in love with Sonic Youth in the last, decade and a half or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
And there is some Sonic Youth that I think you in particular would adore. So I will leave it at that. This is not a Sonic Youth episode.
I'm ready for that mixtape.
Yeah, I think if you were open to giving it some spins, I think there's some Sonic Youth that would really resonate with you.
I'll take it. I'll take the playlist.
So back to Sister Ray and the Velvet Underground, and we are very long on this episode, so we should wrap it up here pretty quick. But when you think, we talked a little bit about John Cale's organ. We certainly talked about Lou Reed's voice. I think one of the things that, between Lou Reed and Sterling Morrison's guitar, the lack of bass, being what it is, the guitars on this song, even before it gets into the noisy feedback section at the end, are really dirty and grimy. And, they sound like they're playing out of the shittiest kind of dime store amps. And,
yes.
And so there's that kind of garage rocky kind of thing. But yeah. I think that really adds a weight and a heaviness to this song too. So I'm wondering if there are certain elements that resonated with you, even if you didn't immediately connect with the songs. Like you talked about the organ, but how do you feel about Reed's voice, and what did you think of those guitars?
Yeah, so it was mostly the organ that I responded to because it's so dynamic and it was so expressive. But I did also really notice the interplay and the paradox between the chaos of the organ and the really kind of smooth Lou Reed vocals.
Yeah.
I felt like his calm demeanor, even the delivery of the refrain over and over again, it's very Lou Reedy,
yeah.
He is unflappable, and it gives you that stability. It gives the music and the song that stability to flip around. It's like one of those inflatable sails things, like those. I can't remember what they're called.
The crazy guy. Yeah, the
inflatable tube man.
Yeah.
Lou Reed is the fan, and the organ is the tube man flipping around. Right.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other. The guitars coming in with that, it sounded like a broken amp. We talked about feedback or distortion being manufactured through poking holes in the amps. This felt like it was way too much input, and it was just crackling. It was like, and it makes you kind of, there's a visceral tightening and there's a reaction. There's a there's a physiology to listening to this song. So there was a lot more that I got out of it, but I just didn't have the time to invest many listens into a 17-minute song.
Fair enough.
And that's what I mean by I get it. This is much bigger than a song. This is much bigger than listening to a song by a band. This is a performance by the Velvet Underground in this way that it is. And I don't know enough about any of those things to be able to really pull out of it as much as I know is in there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think some of those elements are particularly compelling. Lou Reed is a tough one. I have a love-hate relationship with Lou Reed. When he's great, like on the first Velvet's record, like on his second solo record, Transformers, kind of the one with Walk on the Wild Side on it, is kind of the big, kind of famous one. That record's amazing. But then you get into a lot of his stuff, and his lyric writing is very, there was a chair in the corner and I walked over and I sat on the chair and then I ate a sandwich while I was sitting on the chair. It's like very, very sort of specific in a very droll kind of way. And his voice is, Lou Reed is a thing. And sometimes it's great
that
for
sounds
me.
like, that reminiscent of beat poetry almost, right?
That's, yeah, 100. Well, and Sister Ray again adapted from a short story that he wrote, so it makes sense, right?
And it feels like he's a derivative of, right?
Like, I think that's right. Yeah, and when we get to Metal Music Machine, which is entirely instrumental, I think there might be some vocals on it. I'm trying to remember. But it is effectively the back half of Sister Ray without the front half.
Right.
So if you want to connect those dots that we have talked about from Link Ray to Sun, Metal Music Machine is right there. So we will get to that when we get to that. But anything else you wanted to hit on the Velvet Underground and Sister Ray before we close up shop tonight?
Just the range, like this is a display of courage, of ambivalence, of arrogance, confidence.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. And it's what we're doing right now. But it's with integrity. We're doing it all the way. We're intentional. We know what we're doing. And it's our art. And it is authentic. And so, like, there's so much there. Like I've said before, there's just a lot there.
I think authentic is a really good word for the Velvet Underground, because they are as pretentious as fuck. And without that, if they weren't authentic, if they were inauthentic, it would be unbearable. It would be unlistenable. Yeah. But because they are so authentic, I'm fine with the pretension, because I love real. Steely Dan. It's like the Steely Dan thing. Like, look, if you could pull it off, you could be that pretentious, and the Velvet Underground pull it off. So,
I think
all
that's
right,
the
good
best
conversation. I think I know where we're going in our Song v Song tonight. Every episode, we pit our current champions, our individual champions, against the episode's current song and see which one we will take into battle next week. My current champion has held steadfast for a good number of episodes now, since episode 4, that is The Witch by the Sonics. It is not going to beat Sister Ray for me, so I am going to keep The Witch into episode 10. Dave, your current champion is from episode 8. That would be Sunshine of Your Love by Cream, and I am assuming that song will go into next week as well. Is that right?
It is correct. It's going to be hard to topple. There's a lot I like about that song.
Yeah, that's how I felt about The Witch, but I think I know when it's going to fall. We'll see if that is next week. Next week, again, will be episode 10. And again, we will be staying in 1968, so I'm excited about that. We will be talking about Voodoo Child by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, which should be a lot of fun. So that will be next time. Thank you, David. Always a good time. And as always, keep it heavy.
I love these chats. Okay, thank you. Bye.